Welcome to another episode of Jamming with Jason. Hey, today we have a very exciting episode. Why? For a couple of reasons. First off, you know that we often talk about leadership on here, but today we're going to kind of spin it around and say that leadership is overrated, and we're going to get in and talk about why that is. Now, if you notice from the title as well, it is Mefford interviewing Mefford. Yes, that's right. You heard that correctly. Mefford and Mefford, right? So we don't we don't really know each other. We just met on social media, but I'm excited to have Chris Mefford with me today, talking about leadership is overrated. And so with that, we're just going to jump into the episode and roll that beautiful podcast footage now. All right, Chris. When you reached out, it was like, hey, we have the same last name. We got to talk. We got to be on a podcast. I'm like, oh, yeah. And you talk about leadership? Oh, perfect. Right. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Yeah. And purposely, I mean, we don't really know each other, but we're going to get to know each other, and people listening are going to get to know you too. So maybe just give kind of a quick thumbnail, because I know we want to get in and talk about your book. Leadership is Overrated: How the Navy SEALs and Successful Businesses Create Self-Leading Teams That Win. So that's a big topic for me, and we'll we'll see where this goes. But yeah, take it away. Let's do a little introduction here.
Well, I'm excited to be here. Yeah, it was funny. I was on LinkedIn and saw your podcast pop up, and I was like, "Wait, there's another guy named Mefford who does this stuff that I wrote a book about." I was like, "We have to meet and connect." So I'm
Yep.
glad to be here. It's kind of funny. I'm sure we're definitely related. It sounds like we are. We had a little pre-conversation from a
Yeah, we
long,
go
long time
we go we
ago.
go way back, probably in how we're
Yes.
how we're related. But yeah, we're both our families came over from Germany before the Revolutionary War, so we've been here a long time. And I don't know
Yeah,
too.
indeed. And we both made it to the West Coast.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you know too, but it kind of shocked me. But if you remember when the Mr. Rogers movie came out that Tom Hanks was in,
Mhm.
Tom Hanks and Fred Rogers are both from the Mefford line, the same Mefford line. So we're
Yes, I
related
knew
to them
that Tom
back
Hanks's
too.
father,
Yeah.
I believe his name is Mefford or something. He played in a band or something along those lines. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So it's kind of
grandfather.
interesting. It's a big world, but it's a small world at the same point. And I think it's a good lesson for everybody is it's like, hey, quit thinking that we're so different from everybody else. There's probably some commonalities if you just look for them, right? So
Yeah, and that's a good leadership lesson while we're on it.
it is, as a matter of fact, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
No, I grew up fascinated by leadership. Ever since I was in high school, I was interested in it. Ended up uh working for different organizations and learning, in many ways what not to do as a leader by watching other leaders fail or be uninspiring, if you will. Um, and then ended up in Nashville working for a guy named Dave Ramsey, if you're familiar with him or your
Yep.
listeners, for about 10 years on his radio show. And he was really, really passionate about growing leaders, developing leaders. He wrote a book called Entre Leadership. Many people know him for his personal finance and his debt and his radio show around that topic. But he was very passionate about growing leaders within the organization and had a business program called Entre Leadership. I actually even started that podcast for him, Entre Leadership, as the first producer. Actually co-hosted with a guy named John Acuff for a little bit,
Oh, wow.
and then kind of grew from there and became extremely excited about it. But really, having worked there and other organizations, I've been at 15 years. The organizations I've been a part of and grown and helped have won Best Place to Work in their city. I'm at a place now where we actually won Inc. Magazine's top 500 places in America to work, and I just see it differently, and it frustrates me when I hear and see and watch people struggle, whether they're leaders or they work for a leader, on why they can't get people motivated, why it's so hard, why people don't like their boss, et cetera. And I think there's just so many just little things you can do that aren't hard that just would excite, motivate, build loyalty, and to show appreciation. And I just started getting so frustrated because it seemed like it didn't take much, but so many were either unwilling to do it or unwilling to change, or happy with the status quo. And so I bumped into a guy, Kyle. We became best friends, and he was an active Navy SEAL. at the time. He's retired now. And I said, what do you guys do that's different? And he's like, he was fascinated by the business side of things. What are you guys doing in business that where you keep winning best place to work? And what we found out was we did and acted and behaved in very similar fashions. And so we decided to put a book together to kind of document those conversations.
Yeah, and I think it's great because I throughout my career, obviously I've worked for good leaders, I've worked for bad leaders, right? And what kind of frustrates me too, and the problem is it's like you're going against the grain, because I've worked for people who were quote unquote great leaders. They worked for these, huge companies. They had the really expensive leadership training, but they weren't really leaders, right? They were using the external power kind of side of it instead of the internal power. And just really to me, they were always just glorified managers with a big stick and pretty hair, but they weren't
Yeah.
really leaders. And yet, so much of the time in the business world, right, we're showing those people as the examples of great leaders. And it's like, are you kidding? I would never want to work for that person, right? So I don't know if that's been your experience too, but trying to
Yeah,
teach
I mean,
people and
what you're
show
referring to
people.
is an issue that we have and companies and organizations have, whether nonprofits or for-profit, top 500, and it's we elevate people into positions of authority, and they tend to take that positional leadership and say, hey, I don't have to earn your respect. I've been given a title now. We don't necessarily even train them, or they're not really good people to be put in charge of other people. We do this in the sales world a lot. Hey, you're the best sales guy. Why don't you become the head of
It says,
all
man.
sales? And then they either fail or people hate them. And so just because we elevate people, we tend in this country to call it leadership, whether it deserves to be called that or not. I mean, the gist of what we write about in our book here, I'll hold it up here for your viewers if they want to see it, is this. We spend $60 billion a year in this country on leadership development. 60 billion with a B. And that's on everything from workshops to TED Talks to conferences to development to whatever you might have, speakers. And what we see year after year, whether it's Gallup, whether it's Forbes, whether it's Harvard Business Review and the surveys they produce, is that year after year, survey after survey, 70 to 85% of the survey to hate their boss.
Mm-hmm.
And so our premise is this, like we think leadership is a class structure gone bad, that it's an entire industry that takes advantage of the low man on the totem pole. They're not interested in actually making better leaders. They're interested in selling you more books or selling you more workshops. And so when we have spent $60 billion in this country to create better leaders, and yet year after year, survey after survey, 70 to 85% of those surveyed hate their boss, then there is something drastically wrong with what we're doing. That's not a good return on our investment, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So let me flip the script and say to you, well, that's probably, a lot of people don't like their boss or whatever, but we'll flip the script. When we ask leaders specifically, hey, how many people on your team do you think hate you? They generally say about 30%, 15 to 30%. So the numbers match up because of the opposite. So the
Mm-hmm.
leader is just completely confused. They think everybody loves them. They don't see their limitations or obstacles and barriers and that they put in place for their team. And so we know those numbers match because they kind of fit. And it's an issue then that we have to work with. Now, I'll explain to you why those numbers matter. So let's say I come in, or Jason, you come into the office and you have a 100% capacity to give me or the organization every day. But if you feel demoralized or underappreciated or unrecognized by your team or your boss or your company, you start to go, well, I don't like them. So only 15 or 30% of my effort is going to go towards that work day. And so now you have a workforce who's uninspired to work for you or on behalf of your leader, and they're only putting in between 15 and 30% of their 100% potential effort they could give. Now, if you could change that number, if you can make that number 50% of the team that doesn't like the boss, or flip it and say, hey, we want to get it to 90%. Imagine what that would do to your bottom line. Imagine what that would do to your company. Imagine that would do to your culture. Imagine it would do to the bottom line of your country, if you're out there wherever you're at. And
And
so,
we're in the national election year, right? So again, it's like
right,
who's really
right.
a leader and who's
So,
not, right? Yeah.
and so I think that's what's at stake here is a lot of leaders associate culture and leadership as this nebulous, cool, 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 but we got to make money. I don't care if you like me. We don't have to be friends. But the reality is, your team wants to feel appreciated. Your team wants to feel passionate about what they do. They want to love where they work. And when you diminish it and you don't pour into them or you don't care about them and they don't put effort in, then you as a leader start to blame them, which is extremely poor leadership. And B, you don't focus on your bottom line, which has been your mandate probably as a manager or a leader to begin with. And so you really need to start to think about, hey, how can I flip the script here? Because in reality, it isn't about putting ping pong tables in the lunchroom that creates great culture. It's about individual relationships that create great culture. And that's when you start to see the bottom line of your entire organization start to switch on and start to go, hey, what's going on around here? Why is this? When I was at the Ramsey organization, I got put in charge of a really poorly performing department. And within a couple of years, we were one of the top performing departments. Dave even shared with me, hey, Chris, or he actually said, hey, Mefford, you'll appreciate that.
Yeah.
Hey, Mefford, you took the very worst department in the company and you made it the very best. And so it wasn't that we all got along, we liked people and everyone liked working with us. It was, we were operating at not a great level financially. And all of a sudden, we're operating at a strategically financial position for everybody from our radio relationships and everything in between. And it
Yeah.
was just, I started treating people nice. We go for walks. I'd talk to them. I'd ask them about stuff. I'd motivate them. I'd share with them. I gave them, pep speeches and opportunities and like it was just, I just started to value them as a human being and what they did. And I started doing it more than once a year in a performance review, and it started to turn around the team. And it was easy as sending a text message while I sat at a Friday night football game. Hey, I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks for an amazing week. I really appreciate how hard you work for us. And that was it. And people would save those messages. They would share them. And it's not hard, but it is frustrating. And that's why we titled the book Leadership is Overrated. Because just because we put you in a role or a position of authority in leadership, it doesn't mean that you are an actual leader.
Yeah, and I think it's ironic. I mean, so much of life, the correct answer is 180 degrees from what we've been taught, right? And so I think
Mm-hmm.
I think, as like what you were just explaining there, the low amount of engagement, right, that people have when they don't like their organization or they don't like their boss, right? 15% of your workday is all the productivity that you get out of somebody who doesn't work for
Mm-hmm.
somebody who's really a good leader, right? And so what's ironic is the leaders, who many of them are just glorified managers with a stick, right? They start beating on the people figuratively, saying, come on, we got to make more money. Come on, we got to sell more, whatever, right? But they're demotivating them instead of motivating them, right? Because that's again what they think they have to do. And the irony is, if you back off, if you start treating people like humans, if you send the text at the Friday night football game, if you talk to people and see them as people, all of a sudden, if their productivity goes up to 50 or 60%, that's 3 to 4 times, right, what you were getting before. Imagine how that's going to drop to the bottom line, right? Which is again, it's ironic. It's like, ease off and treat your people like people, and everything else takes care of itself, right? I mean, it's kind of like that old, I think it's Richard Branson, quote, where it's something like, take care of your employees will take care of your customers, and your customers will take care of your profit, right? And
Yep.
but usually it's the other way around, right? That we're focused so much on getting the profit, and we usually kind of forget the employees until the end, which is
Yeah, in
ironic.
marketing, we have a similar thing. It was like, don't tell people what your product is, tell them what they can do with your product. They sound very similar, but that one is focused on you, one is focused on the consumer.
Hmm.
And that's where most people get it wrong when we do small business marketing or messaging along those lines. And it's the same way in the business world. If we focus on, we're passionate about focusing on our customers. No, the hierarchy is, if you focus on your team and teach your team to focus on your clients or your customers, they'll take care of the rest. Just get out of their way.
Yeah.
But we don't tend to do that these days in
No, and so
leadership.
I think it's interesting, and so maybe we can kind of jump into talking about, the corporate leadership versus the SEALs, right? Because again, I think I think sometimes we think of, generals in the military as great leaders, right? I mean, a lot of them go on to be corporate executives or, motivational speakers or other things like that too, right? But that also is kind of a different leadership skill set or mindset, it seems like, than a small team like a SEALs team would have in it. And so I think it's because, at least for me, a lot of times I'll give kind of the command and control leadership a hard time, right? Which
Mhm.
often comes from the military. I mean, most of leadership in America is really based on military command and control style after the Second World War. That was built into all the corporations. All these millions of men that had been at war came back home, and we just kind of translated a lot of those military principles into the corporate world. And it's great, if you're trying to keep people alive because they're getting shot at. It's different if they're making widgets, right? And so I think there's been a little
Right.
bit
And
of
they
a
don't have to, like
disconnect.
when you're in the military, that you tend to have signed up and say, these days at least, and say, hey, I'm here and you have a commitment and you must follow these rules. The military has a reason for that. I need you to listen
Yep.
to me and trust me, or else you could get yourself killed and me killed. And so there's that. But the reality is, in the real world, is if I don't like you, I can go over here and work. Or if you don't
Hmm.
like me, you can go over someplace else and work. It's not, if you're in the Navy, you can't just go to the other Navy. Or you can't just go up. You're like,
Well,
you
you
have to
can, but you're
figure that
called a
out.
traitor and treasonous, right?
Yeah. There's a couple of things that I'll share is the leadership style that we are familiar with hasn't changed much since the late 1800s. And so it is a little outdated these days, especially, in light of all the constantly changing roles and onlines or contingent workforces and remote workers that we have. It really hasn't changed much. And so that's one reason why we feel so frustrated is we're trying to jam ourselves into a late 19th century kind of philosophy on how things should be run or operated, and with very little adaptive kind of cognitive ability to kind of flow and create teams that manage and stuff. The other thing is that, you talked about the military and the SEALs. We actually wanted to call the book Kill the Leader. um,
No.
yes, a
Publisher
little
probably didn't
side
like
story
that
on
one though,
that.
right? Yeah.
So the reason we wanted to do that was, and the Navy SEALs, they practice this thing. So they don't necessarily put the guy with the most senior level rank. He's got the most years in. He's the highest ranking person in charge of the mission. They put the person in charge of the mission who has the most experience with whatever it is they're dealing with. The best guy over here that's going to do this, or the best guy over here is going to do this, and then they're all going to work together. And then as they're training for the mission, they'll say, "Hey, Jason, you're head of this mission. But 3 minutes into the mission, you die, or 3 hours into the mission, you die, or 3 days into the mission, you die. What are the rest of you going to do to make sure this mission still comes off and is very successful in spite of it?" And so, we tend to like, you're the leader, you must have all the answers, you must have all the solutions, you must face the music, you must get all the credit, and so that's the way that old 19th century philosophy works. The new strategy that Kyle and I write about in the self-led teams is that, we need to create teams who are able to complete the mission in spite of, whether I get sick or somebody gets fired or let go, or someone transfers or quits. Like, what does that mission need to be that we can all rely on? We give too much credit to the leader, quite frankly, and not enough credit to the team who helps the leader pull that off. And so the reason we want to kill the leader is because of that principle is like, hey, can we train it? So the funny side story is we were meeting with HarperCollins back in January of 2001 to come up with the title of this book. And we were meeting with them like on January 11th or 12th. And it was just after the January 6th kind of storm of the
Yep.
Capitol. And they're like,
Yep.
there is no way we're calling this book Kill the Leader. That's not going to happen. So if you look at our book, I'll show you. You'll see that in chapter one here, we titled chapter one Kill the Leader. So
Yeah,
we just moved
you
it
can
in.
still you can title the chapter that, but not the book, right? Yeah.
Right, the book.
Well,
But that's the principle is that, hey, the leaders are the problem most of the time. If you just get out of the way as a leader, my job as a leader is, I'm not sitting in my office waiting for you to screw up so I can fire you or call you in and yell at you. I'm sitting in a true leader. I'm sitting in my office to figure out where are your roadblocks so I can help you get rid of them, so I can help you win. What's the problem? Are you getting, the runaround from this department? Are you telling us that you don't have the resources you need? Like, that's my job. I'm going to find those resources for you. I'm going to get rid of that roadblock for you, and let's go. I'm here to help my team, not wait for them to screw up so I can yell at them or fire them. And I think there's that mentality that exists, that people are fearful. That's exactly what they think of a leader these days. And so it's like we just need to kill that whole philosophy of leadership that we knew it. And we need to start to build on specific teams. And so we write about a lot about this in our book. We tell this great story about Aretha Franklin. We've got these great stories about 19th century explorers and how the captain gets sick and how and the captain gets sick because he's trying to run things his way and the whole team gets sick. So once the captain gets extremely ill and he's no longer part of the situation because he just can't get out of bed, the team comes together and says, we're changing everything. Here's what we're going to do. And we're going to work on this together. And we're going to change how we're going to eat and what we're going to do. And they all instantly get healthier, to the point where they start forcing the captain to do that as well. And he comes back to health.
Hmm.
Or we talk about the Waterson's bookstores up in England. And Waterston was a bookstore that said, hey, you're not going to make it. Bookstores are a dying industry. And the CEO comes in and says, I think differently. What if I start to restore power back to the local bookstores instead of centralizing it right here at the corporate offices? And so instead of us kind of dictating what books are going to be on the end caps and what stuff we're going to put at the front of the store and the kind of person we hire, the bookstores that typically hired people who were just cheap would work for what they paid. The end cap books, which is the most visible in the bookstore,
Mhm.
the book publishers were going to spend sponsorship money to put those things there, whether they were good books and healthy or not. And then we're going to put this little kitschy junk up at the front as people walk through, like you're at the grocery store, you're going to pick up a pack of this or that. And he said, I'm going to give the authority back to Waterson's. I want you to hire people who actually know what they're talking about when it comes to books. I want you guys to put the books that are going to sell the best on the end caps. I want you to create a store that you think your customers are going to appreciate more than what we think. Organize it. It's up to you. That company turned around from top to bottom. And they turned around so much and so quickly that Barnes and Noble noticed. And Barnes and
Oh,
Noble said, hey, we hire you. Will you come and do the same thing for all of our stores? And so, that he got out of the way. He was like, hey, I'm here to help. Let's hire great people and get out of their way and let them do so. That's what a leader does. He empowered his team, and he will tell you he didn't do anything. He let the team do it. And so we're so desperate these days to have this clenched fist. Look at me. I'm a great leader. It's a paradox of leadership, I call it,
mhm.
which is this. Um, if you give away all the credit to your team and you allow them to thrive and you essentially say, I had very little to do with the success of this project or what this team accomplished. And I want to thank Jason, I want to thank Chris, and I want to thank David, and I want to thank Lisa and Kelly, because of them, we're able to do everything we do. The paradox is this: I actually look like the leader I'm so desperately wanting people to notice. So when I hold on to all the credit and say, my team did a good job, thank you, my team is amazing, thank you, I know, thank you, it's all me. The opposite happens. And so
Mhm.
it's hard for our brains to function. You mean if I don't take any credit and I give it to everybody, I actually look really, really good. Versus if I don't give my team any credit and I take all the credit, I actually look really bad. I don't know, like our brains are not wired. That's not what we're taught in leadership school. In leadership school or even, in the military in many ways, they're
Mhm.
taught, you're in command, you make the decisions, you're in charge. And that's just simply not how successful teams, whether they're in the military or not, operate.
No, and it's interesting because as you're talking here, I had several things kind of go through my head. I mean, one of the billionaires that I worked for, he used to say all the time, he's like, I'm just a dumb old farmer, but I know how to hire smart people. Right. So
Yep.
again, it's like any question why that guy was a billionaire? Right? Because he hired people and he let them kind of run. Obviously he contributed and other things like that. But I think it's a difference, like you said, is so many of the leaders hold on to this ego, right? And they want to be the ones who receive the praise as opposed to just being grateful and giving away the credit to the team because ultimately that's who really did it, right? But it goes against a lot of what people think leaders are or how we're training people to be leaders as well, which is
Mhm.
is really kind of ironic. And so I wanted to kind of go back to the SEALs a little bit because I remember you saying, again, it's not necessarily the person with the highest rank who's the one that's in charge of this of the mission, right? It's a person who's best qualified for that particular mission, right? And so again, if the mission had a different focus, then somebody else on that team probably would have been the lead instead of this person. But it sounds like, and so, kind of tell me if this is true. It's like, because I know the SEALs teams are small groups of people, right? That do very tactical projects, if you want to call it missions, right? We'd call them
Yep.
projects in corporate. Very small group of people, but they work together. It's my understanding, right, that they kind of work together as a group on all these different things, right? And so, depending on what the mission happens to be, one time, you might be the leader, next time I might be the leader. And so it sounds almost like rank is kind of thrown out in that. Is it's like it doesn't matter whether you're a sergeant, whether you're a lieutenant, whether you're a colonel. It doesn't matter what your rank is. It doesn't matter how many years you've been in. We just pick the person for that mission who is most qualified to help us accomplish the mission. Did I hear
Yeah,
that right?
yeah, so it's ironic that when life and death is on the line, we don't tend to have these issues with who needs to be in charge. If you're gonna
Yeah.
drop me from the back of a cargo plane into the middle of the ocean with nine other guys, and we have to swim into shore and rescue some hostages that are being taken up or blow up an oil platform or whatever it might be, um, I don't really care what your rank is. Put the guy who's got the most experience in the front of that line because I don't want to die. And that's
Mhm.
kind of that mentality. It's easy to kind of give up that authority as a leader when life and death is on the line. And that's the what Kyle will share with you. And, I think when you look at that, you can, if I say to most people, hey, name me one Navy SEAL, name me one Navy SEAL. Nobody can, very few people can actually do it. But if I say, hey, name me a SEAL team, they'll say, oh, SEAL Team 6, oh, SEAL Team 4. So the team itself has become more famous than the individuals. And so that's just kind of where we're at, was the team accomplishes together. Kyle will share a lot with me, and all the Navy SEALs do this as well, which is, it's interesting. You don't become a Navy SEAL because you made it through Hell Week. You don't get to call yourself a full Navy SEAL for almost 2 years. And so we oftentimes, as groups or organizations, will send people away for like a weeks long conference, and we'll say, all right, you're a leader. Or we'll say, hey, the culture of our organization isn't great. And we had Chris come in and he spent 3 days with our leadership team. We're about to turn things around. And you're like, this is going to take a minute, right? This is not going to be a week-long endeavor. This is a commitment that takes 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. But if you don't start now, you're not going to go anywhere. You're not going to get there.
Mhm.
And even the SEALs themselves, Hell Week is hard, but they'll all tell you it was the most mentally exhausting thing they did. But the one of the hardest things they did was Pool Week. Pool Week is right
Oh
after Hell
yeah,
Week.
no, yeah, because
That's
one
where
of
they
one,
make you swim until you pass out because you have to build
yeah,
trust
yeah, yeah.
until you black out underwater, or they're gonna tie you upside down and tie your hose in a knot, and you have to not freak out and kind of manage that. It's interesting to me, and I think there's a good leadership principle. We'll look at people and go, they're going to be a good leader. They're going to make a good leader. They're going to be an awesome leader. And we do that with the SEALs. The SEALs, if you get them in groups, and I do a lot of work with the Honor Foundation, which helps transition special forces into the civilian life once they're getting out of the military. And so I've gotten to make some really good relationships with many, many of them. And they love the Hollywood version of the Navy SEAL. They love the Hollywood version, which is the 6'4", 6'6", super muscular guys that run. And here's why they love it. The average SEAL is about 5'8", 5'9". Not a one of them I have ever met looks like a football player. They look like a, mostly scrawny 5'8" guy you might see on the street. You would never in a million years recognize most Navy SEALs as you see them on the street. And they like that because Hollywood projects this image of what they look like. So when they go overseas, nobody even suspects that they're potentially, a group of Navy SEALs wandering around because they just don't look like the typical thing. To which
Yeah.
I also add, when it comes to leadership, some of your best leaders are people that you constantly overlook, that you don't want to pour into, or you don't think they're going to make good leaders, or you just don't want to give them a chance because they don't have that right vibe, that right look, that right confidence. And I can't tell you how many times when I've just gotten out of the way and given people authority to kind of do and grow into something, and how I've been surprised and shocked at who steps up and who doesn't.
Hmm. Well, I
And
think
I would say
that's
that's a lesson the SEALs teach too. They don't care how you look. They don't give one rip about what you look like or whether you're a good communicator or whatever it is. They want to know, are you going to melt down on mission with me, or can we fight through this surf with this log on us in the middle of the night for another 7 hours? That's what they're
well, no,
after.
and I think that that is a perfect analogy for everybody, right, to get to, right? Is I think in corporate America, we're showing the Hollywood version of the SEALs, and we're said
Yes.
that's what a good corporate leader looks like. And again, I mean, not to, it's scientifically proven, right? On average, most executives are tall white males. Why? That's the Hollywood version, right, that we've been seeing. Now, obviously, it's been changing over time, right? But there's still kind of this mental picture that we have in our minds of, what we're sold a good leader is. And so I think for any of the people,
Jason, if I could just jump in there real quick. To your point, because I've written a couple of papers on this, on diversity and the on the boards and executive teams.
yep.
You're right, they're predominantly white men, but the companies who have more diversity and gender
Hmm.
diversity, so they have some women on the board, there's some women in leadership, some, have an equal amount, um, and different ethnicities, they outperform sometimes by 20, 25% companies who don't.
Everybody else.
And it comes down to this. I'll explain it. If I'm in a group of people who look just like me and think just like me, and we have to make a decision, we tend to make the same decision and we don't look at all the angles. But if you introduce a woman into that executive team, or you introduce someone of color into that executive team, their experience in life is a great deal different than what my experience and all of us are. So now I have to come better prepared to persuade you to listen to me. So it makes me prepare better. It makes me prepare harder. It makes me think differently, to convince the board or the leadership team about what we should do and what direction we should take, because they bring different perspectives. And as a result of that, it forces me to think, do I actually believe this in a way that I'm willing to, or am I just now at this point going along with what everybody else is thinking? And so as a result of adding that diversity, it's not a matter of just doing it because people look different than you. It's you prepare, your team will prepare harder. They'll prepare differently. They'll prepare more intensely to answer those challenging questions. Or you might go, I was working with this company that did mobile apps. And we had a couple of ladies on the leadership team, and we were like, we should do this and this and this. And they're like, that's not the way women would use this app. That's not the way they would experience it. That's not the colors that motivate them. That one, if it was up to, the full stack developers, which was predominantly men at the time, it would have never like gone, and we wouldn't have thought that way. We probably would have created, and I think there are scenarios out there constantly where if you brought more diversity into your decision-making process, or people who are in charge of making those decisions, you would probably protect your company from
Mhm.
making stupid decisions a great deal more,
Yep.
or potentially, in this case, in the study that we did, you would see about a 20, 25% growth because you were looking at things differently as the consumer would.
Yeah. Well, I think it's because, like you said, there's been plenty of studies that are done out there that prove this, right? So if anybody's listening, you're like, oh no, that's not true. Well, go look at the studies because it is true and it has been for a long time, right? But I think, with that, like you said, we're kind of sold Hollywood version of what leaders are
Mm.
versus who leaders actually are. And I think for some of the people, because I'm not 6'4", I'm 5'8", I'm 5'9", right? I'm 5'9". And and so I think a lot of people, might say, "Hey, I'm a 5'2", overweight black woman, or I'm a 5'7" Asian man, or I'm a, LGBTQ or whatever, right? And might be
Mhm.
thinking, well, gosh, I can't be a leader, or I'm not meant to be a leader because I don't look like what the leaders are portrayed to be. And I think
Mhm.
that does a big disservice too, right? And what's interesting, like you said, and I've seen this a lot too, is you get the big 6'4", 6'5", big, muscular, Dwayne Rock looking guys. And they're, don't get me wrong, right? They're strong, they're muscular, but do they have it up in the head? Right. And so that's why, again, a lot of times the guys who end up making the SEALs are the guys who are strong in the head. Yeah, they're still strong in the body, but they look like a weakling compared with The Rock.
Yeah,
But
and
in
I've
their
seen it on the opposite
head,
side
if you
too.
if you if you could see their head, right, you would
Right.
go,
Yeah.
"Holy shit," right? At that point. And I think, for people who think, "Oh, well, I just don't have what it takes to be a leader," well, throw that out too, right? Because I
Yep.
think a lot of the people, like you said, your best leaders are the ones that you don't expect will be.
Yeah, and I mean, I was just throwing there, I think a lot of women have the same thing. Oh, they might, for them, it's tends to, they're sharp, they dress better, they have better clothes, they have better hair, and the reality is it's none of that. For me, I don't care what your gender is or what your ethnicity is. Can you help us win? Are you best positioned to help us win? And that's who needs to be put in charge. And I feel like a lot of companies are their own worst enemies because they can't uh, provide that opportunity of freedom and growth for their entire organization. And then we end up with companies who have 85% of those surveyed hate their boss.
Yeah.
Um, and so it becomes an ugly kind of environment. Every time I post something or talk about something about bad bosses or what they do, it's the most like stuff I do. It's the most common and stuff I do. And so it just hurts me to know that there are very simple things that leaders and managers and executives could do to change that dynamic completely. But a lot of them don't want to hear it. They don't want to believe it's their problem. They don't want to believe it's them. It's the team. It's which I always joke. You're literally the executive of this company. You're the manager of this team. You hired them. Like, why did you hire people that didn't like you then? Why did you hire people that you don't trust? Why do you hire people that you don't give them the authority to do whatever they want? Like, you're acting like you don't have any authority or position here, but you're the problem. But the good
Yeah.
news is you're also the solution. So, if you're willing to own it and step up and take an honest look at things, you could really transform your organization.
Well, I think it's interesting because, like you said, I think most leaders like to point the finger and place blame on other people, right? But one analogy I always like to use is, look, anytime you point your finger at somebody, you got three pointing back at yourself, right? Just like you
Right.
said, I think most of the time the issues are with the leader. Or same thing, it's like if I'm coaching a leader who's having issues, it's like, oh, so how are your people responding? Okay, well, hold up the mirror, right? Your people are doing this because you're
Mhm.
doing that to them and they're mirroring it back to you so much of the time. And so, like you said, I think one of the first things is to own it, right? Because if you don't own it and you don't, most leadership is kind of self-leadership anyway, right? You gotta kind of own it. But I think too, and as we kind of wrap up here a little bit, maybe we can share some practical things with people that they can just try. Because what I'm
Mhm.
guessing too is, from your research in your book, people don't want to hear that they're the problem. But then usually then once they do identify it, right, then it's like the things that they need to do seem so simple, right? And they want some complex something else, or sometimes the things that they need to do seem counterintuitive. And so maybe
Yeah. So I'll wrap.
share some of
I
those
love it. I'll
things.
wrap up with this. And I always joke, but it's a very serious thing we're dealing with here. We're dealing with people's lives and who they are as humans and what motivates them and what they want to feel passionate about. And nobody wants to feel demoralized when they come into the office every day, either by their job or their boss. And so, to leadership, I would say in these three things, I would say, define, develop, and sustain. Define what your issues are and your problems are and your challenges are. Then develop those areas and improve those areas and create opportunities to show real growth in those areas. And finally, once it's working, sustain it. What do I need to keep continuing to put in and do? So, I'll share this. Boston Consulting did a survey of 200,000 workers across the globe. And they asked them, what do you wish you got more of from your team that would motivate you, that would excite you, that would, make you fully engaged, if you will? And the number one and number two things will probably surprise everybody. And number eight was money. Number eight was money. We think as leaders or organizations, nobody's happy. They want more money. Everybody wants more money. They do. Of course they do. But you know what they really want? Number one and number two was your appreciation and your recognition. They wanted you to recognize that they worked hard. They didn't want you to say you should just be grateful you have a job. You should be grateful you got a raise. They wanted you to appreciate what they've done, both verbally and then recognize it in front of their peers or to them personally. Jason, I'm so appreciative of everything you've done and how hard you work. Why that's so hard for leaders to do, that 200,000 workers across the globe shared that was the number one and number two thing they got. I will, to the end of my days, never completely understand why it's so hard for leaders to appreciate their team or give recognition to their team. It is the
Well,
easiest thing to do, whether it's a text message, whether it's a handwritten card, whether it's an email, whether it's just to stand up in front of the cubes and say, I want to appreciate everything Jason's done or you all have done for me, and take it from there. And so that's it. To you, if you're listening, if you feel like you're one of those people that get left out and you're not recognized or appreciated, I would say you do the same for people around you, your peers. I was interviewing Gary Ridge, who is the CEO of WD-40, the oil
wonderful.
change
Yeah.
spray and they have continually been one of the best places to work in America. And Gary's advice is start on the branch you're on. Like, you may not be in charge today, but you might be one day, and just start on the branch you're on. Like, if you say my boss will never get there or my CEO will never get there, but you have three people you sit with, start on that branch. You have every opportunity to make them feel recognized and appreciated. And that's why sometimes you'll see pockets within companies and organizations that tend to have, better relationships or better engagement, better retention rates, year in and year out than other departments. And that's because they're starting with where they're at on what they're doing. So, if you're a leader, man, it's not hard. Just appreciate and recognize your team and what they're doing. And if you're one of those team members, do the same to those around you who work for you, and do the same for your boss. It might change everything.
Yeah.
As a leader, I can tell you it's hard not knowing, like, we're doing things often that have never been done before, or we're answering questions that have never been done before. And everybody, the sake of the company and my team is on the line. I got to make sure I get the right thing. So just feeling some encouragement from my team will flip the script. Sometimes I've been in places where I don't feel like the team even appreciated anything I was doing for them or how I was doing it. And in many ways, because they were so consumed with themselves. And so as a leader, you have to demonstrate that, obviously, first and foremost, but it doesn't hurt for you to also appreciate the guy or the gal who's at the top from time to time, and work it both ways. And you'll soon start to see your entire organization thrive in different and amazing ways.
Oh, yeah. And I think it's a good, like you said, whether you're a leader or whether you don't think you're a leader, right? Even if you're on the team, you're still a part of leading the team. And so, like you
Mm-hmm.
said, I think too that with sympathetic resonance, from a vibration and emotion standpoint, is if you start doing something, everyone else around you typically will, right? Because they want to
Mm-hmm.
resonate the same that you do. And so, like you said, actually, providing some recognition and appreciation for your boss, even if they're not even if they're not giving it to you, if you give it to them, there's more likely that they're going to give it to you in the future, right? And
Absolutely.
that we all really kind of control it. And whether you're the head of the mission, the head of the project, it doesn't matter. Being on the team also means that you're a leader as well, which I think is great. So, Chris, really appreciate you coming on and talking about this. I think there's some really practical things that people are going to be able to take away. And like I said, this is, to me, it's a passionate thing too, because it's like if everybody hates their boss and they've been in that kind of negative environment at work all day, then what do you think they're bringing home? right? And so if we can help
Right.
improve the workplace, we can help improve the world around us too, right? So mom and dad doesn't come home and yell at the kids and kick the dog because they had a great time at work. They loved that, they felt appreciated, they felt recognized, and they carry that through to other people in their personal lives as well. And eventually, one person at a time, right? This whole world starts to feel more grateful, more appreciative, and recognize the people around us. So,
Yep, that's it. It's not a hard recipe.
no, so great talking to you, Chris. Again, so everybody listening, run out and get Chris's book. You can find it, I think, pretty much anywhere. Leadership is Overrated: How the Navy SEALs and Successful Businesses Create Self-Leading Teams That Win. And Chris, for people that want to get in touch with you, how's the best way to get in touch with you?
They can just email me, chris@cultureforce.team.
Okay. And we'll make sure and put that in the show notes too. So, Chris, thank you, my brother, cousin, whatever we really, really are.
Something where
Mefford,
somehow,
Mefford,
somehow, some way.
somehow, some way. So, but yeah, I appreciate you reaching out and talking, because what you have shared today is going to be helpful for a lot of people. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate having me on. And thank you so much. Very passionate about this. I can tell you are as well. So it's been great this last hour.
Yep. All right. Well, everybody, go out, be a leader, whether you're one or think you are one or not, and start appreciating and recognizing the people around you, and you will just be amazed at how your world changes. And we'll see you on the next episode.
Awesome.